for me to eat my chocolate-covered strawberries, Jack.
Mark, I'm exactly where I need to be in a truck like this, now that we've been teleported here via movie magic.
Oh! Dude, I paid like $20. Oh! Oh! Oh!
Dude, strawberries, man.
Holy shit.
I can jump it.
Yeah. Ah!
I can basically drive a vehicle that, according to Ford and the engineers we spent time with, is as capable as one of their production Baja trucks.
Oh, good for them. I just lost $20 worth of strawberries. I don't care.
I can do big power slides in the mud.
This ain't mud, it's ice. Ah! Oh my fucking God, dude.
The all-new third-generation F-150 Raptor, and thankfully for this video, Ford provided us real engineering support, so I'll do my best to punish you in the shop segment with as much technical information as humanly possible. But with that said, let's quickly walk over the interior space, because this is really a carryover space to a regular F-150 of this generation, which isn't a bad thing, because I think this space is one of the best truck interiors currently on the market. You have a good use of physical controls, there are almost no gimmicks whatsoever, the rear seats are surprisingly comfortable. You have as much space back there as basically any full-size SUV. You still have a regular F-150 bed space, which is incredibly useful. You still have the onboard generator back there. And the interior space as a whole feels fairly upmarket, as it should, as this is a very expensive truck. You have a ton of glass in this thing, which means you have good visibility. Your physical control structure is logical, and these seats are excellent. The seats are one of the few unique bits to this cabin. They're built by Recaro, they're heated and cooled, at least in this trim level. They do a good job on not breaking down on long journeys and holding you in when you're driving this thing like a baboon. The other unique bit of this cabin is the steering wheel. You have some paddle-mounted shifters, and that's about it. Other than that, I think it's time for us to head into the shop and put this thing up on the lift. So Mark, we're here in the shop with the all-new third-generation F-150 Raptor. After spending a lot of time with the engineers, not as much time as I probably would have liked to, but actually getting real engineering support from Ford for once, I have determined that these things are every bit as serious as something like a GT3. And that's the joke that we talk about all the time. You meet people who are like, why would you buy a Raptor or TRX? I could do that with my own money. Well, after talking to the engineers, you cannot. This has a level of mechanical complexity that rivals many dedicated sports cars.
Yep.
And the guys who are designing this car are as serious as someone like Andreas Preuninger from Porsche. I worked with Jack and Tony at Ford, and they kind of walked me through what they did with this thing. So let's talk about what they didn't change though. First, yes, you have an all-new body, you have all the improvements from the regular F-150, but the drivetrain is largely identical. We're gonna start there first. So it's still the twin-turbo EcoBoost 3.5 liter. It makes 450 horsepower, and it makes 510 foot-pounds of torque. It has the same front and rear differential options that you could get on the prior generation, which means you get a clutch-based rear differential, you get a optional Taurus in front, you still get the 10-speed automatic. It's still twin-turbo, it's still the high-output variant, but they did add a trombone loop to the center of the exhaust to give it a more exuberant sound. It doesn't sound like a V8. It'll never sound like a V8, but at least it's louder. Honestly, it sounds like a GTR.
Yeah, when you're outside and you hear it ripping by, you're like, oh, is that a GTR? But that's the twin turbo sound. It's got a more bass tone. And as we're going to go over right now, most of the things that they've improved here were direct response to the complaints from the last generation truck, where it didn't have as much character as something like this should have.
Yes.
So things like the exhaust were super important.
So underneath, this is basically not a regular F-150 at all. Yes, they start with the heavy-duty variant of the F-150 frame. However, the front frame rails are different. All of the suspension geometry is essentially unique. For the first time ever in a Raptor, the knuckles themselves are unique to the Raptor, which allowed them to mount the CVE joints lower, which gave them more articulation room, so you could have more wheel travel. The rear suspension architecture is entirely different. They've gone away from a leaf spring and they've gone to a coil spring, which is huge for a couple reasons, but it's primarily due with traction and ride comfort. center the rear axle as you're getting this thing like basically bumping on road, getting it loose. The coil springs allow it to maintain traction better. It also improves ride quality. And that's huge because, again, this goes down the regular assembly line of the F-150. So they figured out a way to get one of these things down the line and have an entirely unique rear suspension geometry, which is pretty cool.
It's super important. A lot of these changes they made were to improve wheel travel or to increase wheel travel. And what the engineers had told us is they maxed out what they could do with the leaf spring design. It was that hitting a wall of development with that where they needed to move to a new suspension architecture, which, because the back and the front are so closely related, if you're going to make a change in the back, you got to make a change in the front. That's a big reason why they made the changes to the knuckles, why they changed mounting points of like ball joints and
they
lowering.
even strengthened the steering rack of this car to deal with the sheer amount of abuse this thing can go through. The front, the double wishbone suspension in the front is basically 2 A-arms. The top arm is forged. The mounting points for the ball joints and all that stuff are unique to this and obviously highly strengthened over a regular F-150.
And the shock towers have been reinforced, and there's so much here.
Not just reinforced in the front and rear for you to do ridiculous things with this truck. But you're going to talk to me about the new dampers as well.
Yeah, the Fox shocks, they went to version 3.1, and the big difference between 3.0 and 3.1, Jack, you know what that is?
Inches.
Inches. The shock bodies are now larger, which means more oil capacity. And the way that the shocks work, without boring you too much, is there's different zones for oil flow. They've changed the oil consistency of the oil makeup in the shock to make it more slippery, to cavitate less, reduce heat soaking, and all the things associated with a lot of travel generates heat. The main thing is there's the ride zone where the shock is kind of not being affected. It's just kind of freewheeling in there. And then after it passes a certain zone, there are a bunch of bypass holes that allow the oil to travel underneath the piston, above it, and then you have an active, it's essentially an actuator to adjust the needle valve to control the bypass valve. And how much oil flows and how much pressure is there. And this system is not only electronically controlling it, the physical bypass holes, there's also a hydraulic boosted part of the shock that can assist when the pressures in the shock are too high for just the spring loader or the electronic actuator. So there's all these things going on here to essentially make sure that you're not bottoming out the shock at the extreme travel. So when you hit hard, it's got the control there.
This rivals anything you find in like a high-end sports car.
No, it's very, very advanced shock technology. And it's all controlled, all of that electronic control, all the body control modules and sensors. There's a sensor in every corner of this car to know where that wheel is potentially going to be in terms of distance or travel. You have yaw rate sensors, you have the steering wheel sensor, you have throttle. It's constantly looking at where it needs to adjust those shocks in real time to potentially get the truck ahead of where the road is. That's what it's really trying to do. It's so proactive. It's amazing, and that's partly why this thing rides as well as it does.
And don't forget, Mark, there are 2 suspension packages on this as well. So not only does it have a unique rear suspension geometry for the Raptor, you can get this with either 35 or 37-inch tires, and it's more than just having enormous tires, because when you go to the 37s, they have to modify the shocks. You have a different internal design to the shocks themselves, and the spring perches also get changed. The reason why you want the 37s versus the 35s is the 37-inch tire package allows the car not to get stuck as easily. It doesn't sink into the dirt as much, and the tire sidewall has more energy absorption. However, you do lose out in suspension travel. So it's a plus or a pro or a minus depending on what you want. So if you want the max amount of travel, you have to go with the 35s where you have 14 inches of wheel travel, or you lose about an inch or so when you go to the 37s. But it's still impressive that you have 2 essentially unique shock packages for this vehicle.
We're going to talk about that a little bit in the drive, but this is nothing short of a miracle in terms of what they've done in the truck. And the TRX, you make the argument that they looked at a lot of what they did and tried to do similar things. They are vastly different in the way that their approach is.
The TRX is pure humor. It is like a theatrical, ridiculous vehicle. It's a clown car in the best way possible. This, when you talk to the engineers, at least in my experience, they're very serious. Their whole thing is Baja-ready trophy truck.
It should be able to do absolutely anything within, common sense, which nobody does when you're driving.
But it depends on what you value, right? Yeah. This is a very serious product that doesn't necessarily have the humor of the TRX, but it does return some fuel economy. You don't have many of the compromises from the TRX in this when it comes to day-to-day livability, but you don't get the humor. But I think with that, Mark, it's time for us to head back to Autobahn Country Club or wherever we're driving this and continue our video.
Sounds good.
So Mark, not only can I jump it, send the camera going flying in the car, I can then, after I'm done exploiting the limits of my Raptor, I can go and drive it to work and be refined and be comfortable. This is a true dual-purpose machine, the same way a lot of the sports cars that we love so much are. I guess you've driven this now a decent amount and you've been thrown around in this a ton at this point. How does this compare to the TRX, which we also drove out here?
Different conditions. I feel like this, I feel like it handles the extreme part of like the jumps, the hard impacts a little bit better. I mean, you know, of course, how could you judge this? I mean, they're both amazing.
Outside of us putting this out on a rallycross course and like maybe timing it or being, you know, a professional dirt racer, someone who races in the Baja, it's hard to decide.
This is more serious. To me, it feels more serious. It feels more capable in the extreme side of it. The TRX has more character, and a lot of it has to do with the engine and transmission. This feels like, you know, they're like, okay, we're going out here, we're not fucking around.
Yeah,
where
we want to make a Baja truck.
Right, yeah.
Where the TRX is basically a rolling micro penis.
Well, both
this
of
isn't much
them,
better.
I mean,
but
this is like 2 inches. The TRX is like 1 3/4, and I'm feeling it. So I mean, they're both extreme machines. This is on another level, man. You have the refinement of the F-150, and the thing that surprises me the most is when you're on the highway, there's like no trade-offs.
This is basically a luxury vehicle on the highway.
It totally rides amazing on the street. You would never know what you're in, and then you get out here, and it's just it's pure comedy.
Yeah, I didn't think I was gonna love this thing. I think after spending time with the Ford engineers and spending a lot more time in it driving around, doing what we just did, a lot of the shenanigans we did off camera, I've come to really appreciate this. The 3.5 is an okay engine. It returns good fuel economy for basically a monster truck, and it makes a ton of power, and there's a lot of easy access torque. I will say, like you, it doesn't have the character of a V8, but on the flip side, you return reasonable fuel economy, and overall, I think this is a superior product to the TRX because it's based on the most recent generation of the F-150. The interior is better, you have the body improvements from the F-150, and the overall package associated with this is very impressive. But with that, Mark, I think it's time for us to head into the final thoughts before I make you lose your lunch.
I already did.
Final thoughts on the F-150 Raptor. I wanted to say this first. Huge thanks to Tony and Jack over at Ford. They were the engineers who spent some time with me so I could better explain to you the engineering that went into the new Raptor. So what do I think about the truck? Well, I went into it thinking I wouldn't particularly enjoy this thing, to be honest. I didn't think it would be as fun or as entertaining as the TRX because that truck is hysterical. And in some regards, I was right. This doesn't have the whimsical character of the Ram, but it is far more technically competent, whether it be the body structure, which is essentially all aluminum, unlike the Ram. It is a far better interior space, it's less gimmicky, and it feels more like a luxury product on the road. You don't make that compromise when you're driving it day to day. It drives like a regular F-150. You get reasonable fuel economy at 15 miles per gallon, where in the TRX you got 8. It rides very well. This thing really does ride like a proper luxury automobile. It's really quiet when you want it to be, and it feels like a refined product. But when you take it off-road, it has all of the extreme performance of something like the TRX, or in Ford's case, a street-legal Baja truck. You can do absolutely ridiculous things with this vehicle, which is hilarious in its own. But with that, if you like trucks like this and you appreciate the engineering they put in this thing, you're absolutely gonna love it. So with that, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you soon.